This episode is made possible by the generosity of our listeners. Thank you.
Welcome to the Creation Science
for Kids
show. What happened to the serpent when God dealt with him after the fall? Does this mean all snakes are evil, or is this just a fancy way of humbling Satan? Then we learn what's happening with the creation ministry down under, and it's time for experiments in a baggie. Praise the Lord. I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart. In the company of the upright, in the congregation, great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who delight in them. Full of splendor and majesty is his work, and his righteousness endures forever. He has caused his wondrous works to be remembered. The Lord is gracious and merciful. Psalm 111, verses 1 through 4. This is episode 75 of the podcast where we learn about Jesus, our Creator, and his amazing world. Hi, I'm Sherry Fields, your host, and I'm joined today by my co-hosts Stephen.
Hi.
And Joseph.
Hi.
To follow along with what we're looking at, check out the show notes. creationscience4kids.com/baggies or 075. And be sure to listen to the end for the punny science joke of the day. All right, we're in Genesis 3, and the serpent has already tempted Eve. She ate, she gave to her husband, and God sought them out when they were hiding. Now he's going to start handing out consequences and pointing out what it's going to be like from now on. And he starts with the serpent. Would you read verse 14 for us, please, Joseph?
And the Lord God said unto the serpent, Because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle, and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life.
All right, there's actually rather a lot of puzzling things in this verse. What kind of questions does this make you think of?
Did they used to walk?
Serpents? Yes, that's a very common question.
This verse saying snakes eat dust?
Yeah. In fact, I had kind of figured this would be fairly simple to study out, but I realized, wait a minute, I've got lots of questions here. Let's see what the creation community has to say about it. And we have done plenty of thinking about this verse, and it was rather fun. As usual, I went to searchcreation.org, and it didn't take me more than a couple minutes to get my questions answered. It's such an awesome resource, and I am so grateful to Creation Today Ministries and to the International Association for Creation for maintaining that website. It is a huge blessing. Anytime you visit my website, you can find Search Creation in the sidebar, or you can go straight to their website. Anyway, here's some things that I found about this. First, we will be talking more about them. Ask John Mackay, MACKAY.com, had a question on, did snakes really lose their legs? Because it says, upon thy belly shalt thou go, which means before God cursed the serpent, was he going on his belly?
No.
No, because otherwise, what's the point? He'd be stating the obvious. He didn't tell Adam and Eve, upon your feet you will go, because that would have been, it was already happening. So something changed for the serpent now to be going on his belly. So what's going on there? Now, here's what's really interesting. We have found at least 4 fossilized snakes. So if they're fossilized, when did they live?
A long time.
How long ago?
Back at the flood.
At the flood. Right. So this is before Abraham. At the time of Noah, these snakes were turned to rock, and these snakes still had legs. So one of the things that it's like, okay, so we've got plenty of snakes that only have the teeniest bones that could have been legs once upon a time. But we still have plenty of lizards. So it seems that God most likely just cursed the particular serpent that Satan was living in at that time, that he was speaking through. But here's what this article points out. Besides that there used to be more snakes that still had legs. And there was the way their body structure is, we can tell it's not just a lizard. But the whole lizard class of animals, the way their DNA is, they are particularly likely to develop a loss of limbs where they lose the ability to grow limbs, but still be able to survive and have children. Because if a baby lion is born with no legs, does it ever grow up to have children?
No.
No, it will starve to death long before, and it won't be able to find a mate. Lizards, because of the different ways how flexible their bodies already are, and you think about a snake, if you gave it legs, it still is incredibly flexible, is able to survive and pass it on. So this is real natural selection. For the most part, natural selection keeps bad stuff from getting passed on to the next generation because whatever creature has something go wrong with it never has children. But with snakes, they can pass on this loss to their children far more easily than most animals. So here's the way John Mackay is looking at it, and it makes a lot of sense to me. God could have taken away the legs of that single serpent right away, but also have built in from the beginning, because he knows all things, the genetic possibility for this to happen more and more as time went on. For example, another place we see this is in the microscopic world. Were there bacteria and viruses when God first created the world before sin? Do you remember I've been giving you probiotics? What are those, Joseph?
Extra bacteria to help my body?
Uh-huh. So do you think those bacteria were created at the fall?
No.
No. Bacteria, for the most part, to this day, are overwhelmingly good or no problem at all. Many of them are very helpful. Without bacteria, nothing would still be alive. Viruses can actually help prevent bacteria from messing with you, or they can just be harmless, but they can go bad. And you think about any parasite. A parasite is an organism that can no longer take care of itself. It must feed off of another organism, creature, in such a way that it hurts it. Originally, it could have had more ability to take care of itself. It could have still existed, but not been a bad thing because it could have taken care of itself without having to feed off of a host. That's easy to picture. It's actually one of the main ways that creation scientists look at what happened in the fall. Let's take mosquitoes. Would there have been mosquitoes in the Garden of Eden?
Yes.
Yeah. What do mosquitoes mostly drink even today?
Nectar?
Yeah, and they can poke their straws into fruit and drink the fruit and food coming from plants. The only time they drink blood is
When they are having babies?
right when the female, so they're always ladies. If there's one that's stinging you, you can say, that awful lady, and smash her. It's always a her that pokes you. The guys don't need to. But now, in order for the lady mosquito to have the ingredients she needs to produce her eggs, she must get blood. That's the way the world is now. It didn't have to be that way at the beginning, or even whatever plants that they used to get it from could have gone extinct in the flood. That's one possibility. Anyway, we see all over the place where things were already in place, something got broken, and definitely snakes losing their legs is something in the genetics getting broken, but it having been part of the original creation that's gone awry. Okay, here's another from Answers in Genesis, points out, in our verse, you see, it says, "Thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field." And back in verse 1, it says, "Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made." So their point there is that it was originally classified as a beast. If you go to the zoo to look at the beasts, what are you going to look at?
Predators?
Yeah, okay, so the bigger ones, but also
Lions and tigers.
Okay.
bears.
lions, tigers, and bears. Yes. And also, you've got your cows, lots of them. They're the larger ones, and they all definitely have legs. but that the serpent could have been a large one. Like you think of, we've got today still monitor lizards, and those large lizards could certainly be in the beast of the field category. Then creation.com, which is the website for Creation Ministries International, they have an article on that dust. Let me start here with answers in Genesis. They point out in Micah 7, it's talking about a whole nation being humbled. And when Jesus comes back to be king, the nations shall see and be confounded at all their might. So their strength isn't going to help them at all. They shall lay their hand upon their mouth. Their ears shall be deaf. They shall lick the dust like a serpent. They shall move out of their holes like worms of the earth. They shall be afraid of the Lord our God and shall fear because of thee. So here you see it's being used much more as a picture to help you imagine how small, unimportant, and lowly those people have become. But back to what Creation Ministries International has to say. It points out that snakes do pick up dust particles. How do they smell? Do you remember?
They smell through their tongue.
With their tongues. They stick their tongue out, and what do they do then?
They stick it back in?
Do you remember how it works?
No.
Okay, and the roof of their mouth, there are two little pocket things, and so they stick their tongue out, collect whatever the molecules, because remember, all smells, and this is really disgusting when you've got a bad smell, they're tiny particles of whatever that is in the air, and that's what you're smelling, are actual little tiny particles. Very, very small. Anyway, but it sticks it out, and then it pulls it back in and up into those little holes in the roof of its mouth, and that's how it smells. Those holes in the top of its mouth actually process the smell. So, every time it does that, it's collecting some dust. And some of the dust is going to get swallowed and go through its digestive system. So they really do eat very small amounts of dust. Of course, that doesn't mean that that's what its diet is, that if it eats enough dust, it's going to be able to stay alive. Because what is dust made out of? The kind of dust down near the ground that gets on your feet. Dirt. And dirt doesn't have anything organic that, like, plants that you can use for food. As usual, and this is something I point out all the time, when you look at DNA, you can read it forward, backwards, and folded up. When you read the Bible, it's not exactly forwards and backwards, but definitely you need to read it folded up, where you'll have a key point here and another one over there, like Micah. We just pulled that in close. And God will often, if you ask him, does this sentence mean this, or does it mean that? I have the feeling, from having read the scriptures for decades, that very, very often the answer to the question, is it this or that? The answer is yes. So could God be saying you will be very humble, down on the ground, so low you're getting dust in your mouth? And could it mean snakes are going to get dust into their stomachs?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. He was communicating both. All right, so we see that's very, very real. Also, Answers in Genesis in there where they mention Micah 7 points out, so did God curse the animal or Satan? It appears he cursed both of them. We see that when you go to like Ezekiel, where it's talking about the king of Tyre, and it's very obvious that it's talking about a supernatural being. But does that mean the king of Tyre is off the hook and he's going to do just fine? No, of course not. God is, again, saying more than one thing at a time. It's kind of
not want to become the king of Tyre.
Well, not that king of Tyre, and don't have an attitude like Satan. That's how to avoid having bad things happen to you as punishment from God. All right, so we're going to save the next verse is very, very exciting and special. So that's what we're going to do. We'll stop there for now in the Bible. So I wanted to move on to the ministry of John Mackay down in Australia. The main website, they have the askjohnmackay.com, but the main website is creationresearch.net. And he sends out a newsletter. I really enjoy every time it comes out. It's got fascinating things. Here's why I decided to point this out. They aren't open every day wherever, and it seems like it's a fair drive for most people even down there to get to it. But they have a place where they've got some woolly pines, which were thought to be extinct for millions of years until they found some happily growing in Australia in a ravine, if I remember right. So they've got some of those living fossils. And they also have been doing this cool experiment. They've got a couple of them actually going on. I've been watching. They've got a stalactite machine set up where they're putting in the right kind of mineral-laden water to see how fast you can get stalactites to grow. We have seen stalactites growing without being in a natural cave. Where do we go and see them? They're straws because they're still actively growing. Do you remember?
It was under this, roof of rock, and a waterfall was above it.
Yep. Where is it?
At the zoo.
Yeah. Our local zoo has a beautiful man-made stream that flows down this steep bluff, and at the bottom it's got a waterfall, and there's a path behind it. And so when you look up, and the ceiling is made out of, well, what do you normally make? When you need man-made rock, the easiest kind to work with is?
Granite.
No.
Cement.
Yes, and cement is absolutely perfect for getting stalactites because all stalactites are in limestone, and limestone is just naturally occurring cement. That's where you actually grind it up, and that's how you get your cement. Yeah, and it's got some beautiful straws. The ones that I've noticed were, about 3 inches long? And that's because they only run the water in the summer, and I don't know how long that's been there. So down in Australia, they're doing their own experiment with carbon-laden water to see how fast they can get stalactites to grow. And here, I want to tell you about this. They have been doing their own real research to see how you can lay down sediments in layers in real time. This, guys, this is one of the most awesome things about being a creation scientist rather than an evolutionary scientist. How long did the flood last? From beginning to end?
40 days and 40 nights.
That was actually just the initial rain. A lot of people think that. The whole thing from beginning to end lasted a year. How long do the evolutionary old age people say that it took for most of the things we see, like dinosaur bones, to get laid down and the landscapes we see to appear?
Millions of years.
Yeah, hundreds of millions of years. I was looking at a picture of the wave formation out in Arizona. It's talking about the layers in the sandstone there, and it was saying 150 million years. Very common. Okay, so who can do a real-time experiment to see if they're right or not? Can we do a 150 million year experiment today?
No.
Can we do a 1 year or less experiment today?
Yes.
Yes, we can. We can start one, watch it in real time. And in fact, the most amazing one that God did for us, and all we had to do was observe it, was when Mount St. Helens erupted. At the way it had all the mud and stuff, we could see it carving canyons, laying down layers in real time. We knew when it wasn't there, and we knew in 6 hours it was there. So that kind of thing. So John Mackay's group in Australia, they've been doing stuff, copying another creation scientist over in France. His name is Guy Berthold. I believe that's how you say it, if I remember right. And he likes to study how layers are laid down. First of all, everybody has had to realize most layers in rocks were laid down in water. They've had no choice. There's not really another way to get it to work. They will try a few with sand dunes if you have large scale sand. But other than that, everyone recognizes you have to have these rock layers form in water. So that's already a given. But still, they want to say the ones at the bottom were laid down first, and then you layer it like a stack of pancakes, where obviously the bottom layer of pancake was put on the plate first. This is studying how the way water works and the different size grains work, that depending on the flow, you actually get a whole bunch of the layers forming at the same time. Here, as Berthold also noted, the heavier sediment, so the bigger grains, always ended up as a top layer in any flood pulse flow because it was deposited last across the horizon. They point out that's opposite of what you're taught in geology class regarding density effects. Of greater significance is the implication that fossils buried in the top layer at the starting end will actually be older than the fossils in the bottom layer at the other end. Now, as we're thinking of water washing stuff in. It's only older by minutes or hours. But we can and are doing experiments. In fact, they were talking about they'd had to delay they build this big machine and chute for the water and all the rocks and stuff that they put in it. They needed somebody to run it, and it took them 18 months before they could get somebody to work on it. They spent about 10,000 Australian dollars to get their machine to work and to push the water through as fast, but they're actually doing it today in real time. If you would like to help them out, they are looking for donations to help them. So this place, first of all, it's very exciting. Australia is a very godless country. The Christians there have a lot more trouble than we do in America. The culture there does not want to think about God. And yet they've got this very active, very bold ministry saying, hey, not only are we going to tell you what happened, we're going to show you because we have the truth. You look at the way the world actually runs because God really made it. And here are some ways you can see that it works. And so it's exciting to see that John Mackay and his group are being so bold and especially doing stuff like this. This is for students. They are very strongly focused on the next generation, helping you guys. If you've seen how stuff is actually laid down to become rocks, are you going to believe them when they tell you, well, this slowly built up a 1/4 inch per year and it took millions of years? No, never will you believe it when you've actually seen the truth. The evolutionists can't show you their way because it's all based on assumptions. And if they actually tried to do it in the real world, they would realize how wrong they were. So it's easier to just talk about it. We don't have that problem. We can say, hey, look, watch, see. And of course, all of us must have faith to look at the past. But who would you rather trust? The scientists who want you to trust them, or God who says, I made everything and I love you?
God.
Absolutely. Every day. Let God be true and every man a liar. Now, personally, I'd rather agree with God and not be one of the liars. All right. Now it's time to hear from you. What do you have for us today, Stephen?
Experiments in a baggie.
Awesome.
We did 3 different experiments in a baggie.
Let's start with baking soda and vinegar.
Well, first we got a bottle cap of baking soda. We put it in the bag and we held it there. We poured in the vinegar and we let go of the bottle cap.
After?
We pushed as much air as possible out. And then we zipped up the bag.
Right.
And let the bottle cap of baking soda fall into the vinegar, making the bag get full.
What's it called when 2 different ingredients like that get together and do stuff? Do you know? A reaction. So everybody loves to do baking soda and vinegar because what happens?
It's like explodes.
Sort of, but it foams up. So why did we do it in the baggie? What were we wanting to see?
How full it could get.
Right. Now we actually watched a video and what happened to his baggie when his baking soda got in the vinegar?
It exploded.
Yeah, it actually went pop. Ours didn't. What did it do instead of going pop? It started to
make very small holes.
Yeah, it started hissing because we had a few holes in our baggie. I'd actually used one that had been used before, so it had a couple of places where it was compromised. Yeah, so it got so full. What did the bag feel like?
It felt big, like a balloon.
Yeah, it was all totally puffed up and hard to squeeze. Yeah, so what was that? Do you remember that was filling the bag that hadn't been there before?
Air.
Yes, it's called gas because air is a special mixture of gas that we breathe. What kind of gas does baking soda and vinegar? We looked it up. What does it make?
Carbon dioxide.
Right, and that's the air that we breathe out. So if you just breathe that, you would actually faint because we need oxygen to keep our bodies running. Yeah, but carbon dioxide doesn't hurt you any. And the baking soda is made from sodium bicarbonate, so it's got carbon in it, and the sodium. And it's got vinegar, which is a diluted acid. And when the acid gets together with the baking soda, it produces all this gas. And we did another one where we made a Baggie puff up. What was that one?
It was a yeast experiment.
And what were you wanting to know about the yeast?
Which thing does the yeast like better? No sugar or sugar?
Right. So we took yeast, put it in warm water in a baggie, and one we added some sugar to. Which one was the yeast happy and foamy?
And the one with sugar.
Yes. I remember ages ago learning about making bread where you want yeast to help it be soft and puffy. And it said you must always add something sweet for the yeast to eat. Even if it's just honey, you can't get away with a sugar-free bread. Now, normal like pizza dough and stuff, you don't add very much, but you always add some kind of sugar or sweetener for the yeast to eat. And then what happened? When the yeast was happy, it made
these big bubbles.
Right. So it made gas. And guess what? It makes the exact same kind of gas, carbon dioxide, as a baking soda and vinegar. When you make muffins and cakes, do we use yeast to puff it up and make it light and fluffy? No, we use baking soda or baking powder. That's because carbon dioxide doesn't hurt us at all, and it makes our breads nice and light and fluffy. And our last experiment.
The egg experiment.
What were we wanting to know or experience?
How vinegar can shed your egg's skin without it turning...
Not the skin.
I mean,
shed its
shell.
Shell, right.
Shell.
Yeah, I had remembered I was a girl and we did this and I thought it was so cool. I wanted you to experience it. So the shell is made out of calcium and the acid will dissolve the calcium. In fact, that is what happens with limestone to form your stalactites. In the ground, when the rainwater falls out of the sky, it picks up a tiny bit of acid, and as it goes through the dirt, it picks up a little more acid and makes like a very weak vinegar. As it then runs into the limestone or the cement, it will dissolve a little bit, and that's how you get your stalactites. So that's what it's doing. Of course, it happens a lot faster when you have vinegar because it's a stronger solution. So it took about how long for all the shell to go away?
About
2 days for it. It was still on there, but to have where the shell was dissolving away. I think you could do it a little shorter what did we have to do to be able to see inside the egg and get all the white off of it?
We had to wash it in water.
Yeah, we washed some of it off. Do you remember when we first dropped it in, what happened to the eggshell? What started to collect around the outside of it as we had it in the vinegar? Bubbles. Exact same thing. So actually all 3 of our experiments produced carbon dioxide bubbles. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
So the reason we use the Baggie for the eggshell egg experiment is just to keep it clean. The other 2, it was so we could see just how much gas was being produced. Now, we kind of left the egg in the vinegar for, I think, 4 or 5 days. So what did the egg look like?
It looked like a orange version of the egg.
Right. What was the orange part, do you know?
The egg yolk.
Yes, because the egg white, when it's not cooked, so we had to be careful not to pop ours, it's clear. So the only color was coming from the egg yolk. And then what was the other thing we noticed? Was the egg the same as it had been before, except without the white?
No, it was bigger.
Yeah, and I hadn't thought about this before, but because we left it in the vinegar so long, it had gotten bigger. Do you remember what I told you that process is, where the egg is pulling in the liquid around it onto the inside?
Osmosis.
Osmosis. Yes. So I looked it up because the egg doesn't have any salt and the vinegar doesn't have any salt. So that's not what's going on. But the egg white is so much thicker. Osmosis is where water, plain water, is pulled through a membrane. And that rubbery stuff that's on the outside of the egg, and that's what we were really wanting to experience, is how the egg has not just the hard shell, but inside it has that membrane. And all our cells have a membrane like that. It can pull water right through it. And it was trying to dilute itself until it got to the same density where it was just as thin and watery as the vinegar, which it was never going to do. But it was as full of water as it could stand without breaking. So that was really cool. We didn't pop it. But one of the things that you can see better with the egg minus its shell, the egg is one gigantic cell. The egg yolk is the nucleus. Of course, the actual DNA is really small in there still. But you have the main part of the cell is the white, and then you've got the nucleus, and then you've got the membrane on the outside. So even though it's got all that stuff, it's not a whole bunch of gazillions of cells like we're used to in the rest of our body. A bird's egg is a single cell with way down inside of it is where it would turn into the bird. Of course, the kind we get from the grocery store doesn't have a bird in there. We get unfertilized eggs. But that's how it starts. So you think, what's the biggest cell in the world? What's the biggest bird egg?
The ostrich.
Egg. So the ostrich egg, when it first comes out of its mama, is the biggest cell in the universe. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
All right. Summer is a perfect time to do experiments. As you may know, I am not that much into mess or scary chemicals. I'll leave that for my kids when they get older. But this kind of thing is a lot of fun just to experience, to understand a little more of how the world works. And it doesn't get less messy than working in a baggie where you just throw it all away when you're done. And we didn't even pop it to see whether our egg had rotted, did we?
Well, when we threw it away, it kind of popped.
Oh, the vinegar helps preserve it like a pickle. So we pickled our egg.
Don't forget, you can find links to all the things we've talked about today by visiting the show notes page, creationscience4kids.com/baggies. To let your friends know about this podcast and ministry.
And to connect with all the rest of the things we do with the podcast, stop by the web address I got just for you, CS4KS, the initials of this show, .com, and find out how to send us your own recording. Write us an Apple Podcast review, drop us a note, become a monthly supporter, and see the heart of why this ministry is so important. Has this show been a blessing to your family? Running this podcast and ministry isn't free, plus it takes a lot of time. We have a Patreon account where you can help us out, like Pastor Brian Betworth and Academy of Christian Apologetics for Moms. Thank you. If just a few of our listeners help, even with just $1 a month, it will help cover the rest of our basic expenses, and anything above that will help us improve things for the future. Visit cs4ks.com to find out how you can get involved. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Jen, who sent us a one-time donation through our PayPal on the website. Thank you so much. That is a huge blessing and a great encouragement for us. All right, now it's time for the science joke. Why was the math book sad?
I don't know.
Because it had so many problems.
That was funny.
Well, this finishes up our show for today.
Until next time, have fun treasuring our amazing universe and creators.
Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. Revelation 4:11.